Hey guys, Miss Rogers here. Today we're going to do a lesson with decimal and fraction notation. And what I mean by decimal and fraction notation, all I mean is the way a number is represented when you're talking about the decimal form of a number and when you're talking about the fraction form of a number. Okay, so just the way the number is being represented. Okay, that's all I mean by that. So today we're going to talk about being able to look at a decimal and know what the fraction form of that decimal is and vice versa. Being able to look at that fraction and know what the decimal form is at. Because it's important to be able to be mathematicians to be able to look at a fraction and know what the decimal of that fraction is and vice versa. Looking at a decimal and knowing the fraction. Okay? So in math class, it's important for us to be familiar with being able to interchangeably be able to work with fractions and decimals. So to be able to go from working with decimals and then the fraction form of that decimal, okay? It's really important, and the higher the grade you're in, so the more you go through school, the more that you're going to have to be comfortable being able to use fractions and decimals more interchangeably and use them in the same math problem. So today we're going to do a couple examples with decimal and fraction notation, okay? So if you look up here on my board, I have a couple of different things you need to be able to do when we talk about decimal and fraction notation, okay? So my first one is being able to look at a decimal and know how to convert that specific decimal to its fraction form, okay? And then the second piece that's on my board is looking at a fraction and know how to convert that specific fraction to its decimal, okay? So let's look at a couple of examples and to be able to explain the work, okay? So if I was to give you the decimal of 32 hundredths, okay, the first thing you need to be able to do is know the place values with our decimal, okay? So with the decimals, you know your place values is really similar to whole numbers, except you're not dealing with a ones place value with a decimal. Your ones place value is the number to the left of the decimal. So in this case, our ones place value is 0, okay? Then if we look after or to the right of the decimal, we have our tenths. So I'm going to put that up here. So I have my tenths, and then I have my hundredths. Okay, and I just know that because I know my place values for decimals when I'm dealing with decimals. Okay, so to be able to convert this decimal to a fraction, I need to know my place values. Okay, so I know my 3 is in my tenths place value and my 2 is in my hundredths place value. Okay, so now what you're going to have to do, you're going to have to look at that place value that you are in. Okay, so our last number is in our hundredths place value. So I know my denominator of my fraction is going to be 100 because I'm dealing with hundreds, okay? So the main key word for this is hundreds, okay? But I know that my hundreds had to be in my place of my denominator because of this THS, the this, okay? So if I was to take 32 hundredths and make this into a fraction, I know my denominator would be 100 because I'm dealing with hundredths, okay? My key word in hundredths being hundreds, okay? Now, you might be wondering, how do I get my numerator? Well, if I look at my number right here, I have 0.32. The number that sticks out should be 32, okay? So the 32. Okay, because if I was to write this out, it would be 32 hundredths. Okay, so if I was to write this out, 32 hundredths. Okay, the word that sticks out is 32. Okay, so what I'm going to do with this number, I'm going to place it over 100. Okay, so all I did, I took my main number out of my decimal. So if I was to write this out, I would have 32 hundredths. I put my 32 on top. That's being my numerator. And then I put my hundredths in the denominator because it's going to be in the hundredths place value. Okay, So if I look at this, if I do the opposite of that, so if I was to give you a fraction, okay, so say I gave you the fraction 12 over 100, okay? So my main number right now is 12 because it's in the numerator, okay? So I'm going to just put 12 right here, okay? And my hundredths, that tells me my 2 is going to be in my hundredths place value, okay? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put a decimal in front of the 1 and then put a 0 to the left of my decimal, okay? So all I did was put my 12 right here first, and then I looked at my my denominator, and it's 100, so I know that my 2 is going to be in my hundredths place value, okay? Because now if I look at this, I know this is in my tenths, and then this is my hundredths. Okay? If I look back to my fraction, 12 hundredths, looky there, 12 hundredths. Okay? Let's look at another example. Okay? If I gave you the example 0.7, okay? So if I look at my 7, I know my 7 is in my tenths place value because tenths is right after the decimal point. Okay, so I know my denominator is going to be in tenths. Okay, so my denominator is going to be 10 because if I look at my keyword in tenths, it's 10. Okay, the THS tells you that it's going to be a decimal, so 10 needs to be at the bottom of your fraction or the denominator of your fraction. Okay, then 7 will just go in the numerator spot. Okay, because if I was to write this out, it would be 7 tenths. And the first number when I write it out is 7. Okay, so 7 out of 10. Okay, all right, let's look at another example because where we're in 4th grade, we deal a lot with like the thousands place value. Okay, when I talk about like whole numbers, we deal a lot with thousands. Okay, so let's look at an example where I have to deal with thousands. So if I gave you the number 125 thousandths, okay, now if I want you to give me the fraction form of that, what I'm going to have to do if I was to write this out first, 100 25 thousandths. Okay, so my 1 is in my tenths, my 2 is in my hundredths, and my 5 is in my thousandths. Okay, and all I did with that was I just paid attention to my place value of my decimal. 1 coming right after the decimal being in tenths, 2 being the second number after the decimal being hundredths, and 5 being the third number after the decimal being thousandths. Okay, so if I look at my word form for this, 125 thousandths, my big number that I see first is 125. Okay, then my thousandths, okay, the keyword in thousandths is 1,000. Okay, so I know my denominator is going to have 1,000 in the bottom, okay, because of the last number. Okay, then my big number that's in the word form is 125. So 125 would be on top. Okay, so 0.125, my fraction for that would be 125 over 1,000. The way I would say that is 125 thousandths. Okay, now if I gave you the opposite, I gave you a fraction for that, because you need to be able to go back and forth, because I said as good mathematicians, you need to be able to go from decimals to fractions and from fractions to decimals. So if I gave you the fraction 432 thousandths, whoops. Okay, 432 thousandths, how would I write that in a fraction? Well, my first number I would look at is 432, okay? So I could put that just directly over here, okay? 432. Now, what I need to look at is my denominator. It's 1,000, so that means my 2 is going to be in my thousandths place value. I know that because that's my last number in my numerator. Okay, so I'm going to put a decimal point before the 4, and then a 0 before the decimal. Okay, so my decimal for 432 thousandths would be 0.432. Okay, 432 thousandths. Okay, I hope this video helped you guys with decimal and fraction notation. Until next time, have a good day.